bunch of different Montessorians to find the answer to that. But in general, I think Montessori per se, you can, all the things that I've talked about, you can read in Montessori's books. How we manifest these things. I mean, when Montessori was teaching, I mean, she died in 52. So this was before the internet, and this was before computers, and this was before, really, there was much in the way of even television. I mean, you know, there's a whole lot that's happened in the world since then. And Montessorians are always debating on where do these things get inserted into the curriculum and how are they handled and things like that, because we don't have that much data yet, right? But no, I think the core philosophy, all the things that I've been talking about, those are right there in what she wrote. And the best way, I mean, for me, I recommend to everybody, start with Paula Lillard, because she's easier to read, and she really interprets Montessori really very well for the layperson. But if you want to know Montessori, you have to read her books, even though some of her sentences are half a page long.
I have more of a practical question. When they say that at the lower elementary level, the teacher sits with a student and they plan the week for together what the work's going to be, I want to hear how that is. How can, is the child saying what he wants to learn, but with how much guidance?
Well, in the beginning, there's more guidance. You know, with your 6-year-old, they don't quite know. I mean, they aren't that familiar with even everything that's in the environment. But there are, and the teacher might not know that child that well yet. I mean, that's one of the reasons why you keep the same child, you know, you stay in the same room with the same teacher for 3 years. So everybody gets to know each other really well, and there's not a lot of other stuff going on. You can just focus on what the need of the individual child is. But it starts out with guides where, you know, there's a certain amount needs to be done in math, and a certain amount needs to be done in language development, and a certain amount needs to be done in history, and a certain amount needs to be done in science. And they sit and they negotiate. Because the teacher wants the child to be challenged, but not overwhelmed. And the child really wants to be challenged too. And when the child knows that you're there supporting that, they become much more excited by what's being planned. And by the time, you know, the child's been in school for a year or so, they become much better at knowing themselves and knowing how to plan. And, you know, the teacher knows that child a lot better too. And so the plans become much easier. But I mean, I wish somebody had done that with me when I was that age, because I would be a whole lot more organized.
You touched a little bit on media stuff, and I'm wondering, like, what is the consensus now about media and Montessori? Like, what age do they start introducing computers and that kind of stuff?
I think there's a variety,
Yeah.
but I would say in most Montessori elementary schools, there absolutely are computers.
Like starting with 6-year-olds?
Yeah. It depends on their, again, but they're there for very specific purposes too. And there's also the whole other side of, you know, there's what we do with, people like me anyway, do with computers. And then there's the things that people like computer engineers do with computers. And that's a whole area of curriculum that's being worked on, you know, and it manifests in things like robotics and, you know, opportunities. That there was a time way back in, I think it was the 80s, where they did that, the turtle work with, where the kids would try to learn to do computer programming with a big thing. But there's that whole aspect too that is being integrated in. And computers are part of everything. And Montessori said, bring the world to the child. So I would assume that in most schools, as the practitioners become able to function with them, that those things are brought into the environment. I know in my school, our elementary kids have computers for, you know, for word processing, and they use them. I mean, at this point, we all do our research on the internet. I mean, you know, so they need to know how to do that.
Montessori has always seemed so sensible to me, and I'm always curious why it's not more prevalent, like why there aren't more public Montessoris, why there are no higher grades.
Well, I can tell you the story. I don't know if it's, but when Montessori first had her first school in 1907, you know, people were just amazed. I mean, and in 1911, I think it was there was a World's Fair, and Montessori had a glass enclosed working classroom at the World's Fair that people came and watched to see the kids working. And it was, everybody thought this was amazing. And Alexander Graham Bell and some other very famous people in this country supported Montessori, and you know, we began to see Montessori happening in this country. And then World War I happened, and that totally disrupted the training of teachers. And also there were some disagreements between the sponsors of Montessori and Montessori herself. And Montessori was practically eliminated from this country. It was still prevalent in Europe, although, again, World War II, when World War II came, all her schools in Italy and in Germany were closed down because they were subversive. So that, again, I think that, too, the culture of what a school is in this country, I mean, primarily is based on a very industrial model. And Montessori is the antithesis of that. So it's kind of hard. I mean, the work that the people went through to get this school approved is just amazing. I mean, it's really like trying to pound, you know, a round peg into a square hole to be able to really do Montessori within the confines and the structure of the public education system. It's tough. So, I mean, these guys really deserve huge applause for all the effort that they put in to make this a reality. Because this is wonderful. I mean, this is what, from my perspective, this is what Montessori would want to see. She would want to see her form of education available to all the kids, not just the kids whose parents can afford to pay for it. And so, I mean, that's why my hat is off to these people for the time and energy and effort that they spent making this a reality. Because it's tough. I mean, the bureaucracy of our public education system is tough to deal with. I mean, right now I'm working on a doctorate at St. Mary's in education